When last we left the party, they had just captured Basilis and returned him to the temple back at Beregost. They have now turned in at the Feldpost Inn. It is now the next morning, and as they come down, the three of them come down, they notice as they're getting their food at the bar that Bjornen, there's really only Bjornen and Perdue left in the bar at this time, early in the morning, and they notice Bjornen is actually injured from some kind of battle that he had just fought the other day. And so Taveri, in particular, asked Bjornen, what had happened. And so Bjornen explains to Teferi that he had run into a couple of half-ogres down to the southwest near a fishing, kind of like a fisherman's lake. And so he had actually lost his necklace down there. And so he got pretty banged up, so he had to flee back to Beregost. So that's what's up with him. So the party, after talking to him, agreed to go try to retrieve that necklace for him and to see about hunting down the half-ogres. They kind of debated on this at first. They said they weren't going to go after the half-ogres just yet. They didn't think they were actually prepared to go after them just yet, but they did agree to try to hunt them down in the future. So after talking to Bjornen, they headed out from the Feldpost Inn, and they now were looking around town to see what else they could do. So they decided to actually go and check out the Burning Wizard, which is the fancy inn of the town. I think I've mentioned that in the last video. So as they walk in to the Burning Wizard, picture as you walk in, there's some tables on both sides. The bar is kind of like in the center, and then there's more tables behind the bar. And as they walk in, they notice a gentleman and the barkeep, a woman, both human, kind of hanging out at the bar, and also an older woman hanging out at the bar as well. So they go up. I think Devia in particular at least orders herself a drink. And so they start talking to the three of them, and they kind of overhear that the gentleman in question and the woman, the gentleman, he kind of is flirting back and forth between, to the barkeep. And they find out the gentleman's name. He's kind of has this noble dress about himself, or, kind of puts on airs, I guess you could say. And they find out that his name is Kaladin Tavenhurst, and Tavenhurst, they're actually one of the, at least in my setting, that they're one of the founding families of Beregost. So he's, of noble descent and whatnot. And the woman at the bar, who's actually owner of the Burning Wizard, his name is Maggie. And so they talk to them a little bit, and then they go just a couple feet away from them, really, is an old woman named Teresa. Now, she's kind of in some kind of like plate armor in a way, kind of decked out in what looks like pretty looking, like, really good gear. And so they start talking to her, and they find out she's actually an old adventurer of this region, and she's already kind of retired. She's not looking for any fame or glory anymore. And so they have a couple, few minutes to chat with her, and then they go across to another table down the way to a halfling gentleman that's sitting there, and his name is Zerlong. And I remember, I think it was the person playing Rowan made a joke about I think it was Zerlong tea or something like that. Anyways, so they start talking to him, and come to find out that he was actually camping out the other night around the Ulcaster ruins. Now, Ulcaster is on a plateau to the southeast of Beregost, and those ruins, I'm not sure if I mentioned this to the players at the time. I might have later on, I think, when they went to it. That's another. get to that in probably another video. But essentially, those are ruins of an old magic school. So, so yeah, he was camped out there, and apparently he had lost some boots as he was camping out there. He just woke up the next morning and the boots were gone. So he looked around the camp, he looked around the surrounding area, he didn't see him. He thought about going into the ruins, but honestly, he wasn't brave enough. And so he just decided to come back barefoot to Beargoss. So he kind of asked the party to, keep a lookout for his boots, see if they can go back, see if they see any trace of where his boots might be. So after talking to him a little bit, the party, the three of them do agree to actually go and look for his boots, and he says he'll reward them with, so much gold. I think it's just a couple hundred, but that was sufficient to the party. So at this point, I want to say it was Rowan that towards the back of the inn, there's another side door, and as you walk in, it kind of goes down to this hallway that kind of makes an L shape. And on each side of the walls is basically booths you can kind of go into, and there's curtains you can shut. And so she was taking a look down to see if there's anybody else, in the inn. And normally there was a few people back there, not many, just kind of hanging out, in private. But there was one gentleman in question she came across that she just wanted to go up to and speak to. And the gentleman in question was a hooded figure, or had a hood, I'm sorry. And so she starts to talk to him, and he is having none of it. He's just ignoring her. He's actually in the process of reading a book. So, excuse me, he actually, just ignores her completely. So she goes back to the party, to the rest of the party, and grabs them. They go back and try to speak to this gentleman. And after a few minutes, they are successful in speaking to him a little bit. But for the most part, he's kind of standoffish. After a few rolls, perception and whatnot, the party do kind of notice, I think it was either Taviri or Devia, noticed that the gentleman in question, his face was pretty scarred up from what they could tell. So that was pretty much all I was kind of going off, or telling them at the time. I didn't want to, give too much away. But, so yeah, that's pretty much what they all know. And, oh, that's right, Devia also rolled to kind of see if she could see what he was actually reading. And she knew, obviously being an elf, she knew the language, and that was what was the language of the book. So I had the player do a roll to see if she could see a little bit of what he was reading, and she was successful. And she come to find out that he was actually reading about the World Tree. Now, I'll get to that later, maybe in another video, but for right now, that's all you need to know. So, so the party leaves. They, oh, I'm sorry. They also find out, because I think Rowan asked this, basically what his name was. And the only thing he gave them was his name was John. So the party leaves. They decide to leave the inn. They look around Beargost a little bit more, and they actually decide to go. They heard of that. It was actually, they heard about it from Teresa, that she said there was an old wizard that had his own place just kind of off to the west of Beargost called, the place was called High Hedge. And so the party go to High Hedge to see the wizard. They actually don't encounter anything on the way. It's not that far. I'd say about 2 hours away from Beargost, not that long of a distance. So they go up, they knock on the door, he greets them, and so they kind of, he's mostly in a good mood. Teresa kind of warned them that he sometimes can be in a foul mood, but actually, for some reason, he was actually in a pretty decent mood today. They thought he was all right. So Uh, they didn't get much detail at the time, and I'm not revealing anything here in case they watch this. But that was just one of his good days, you could say. Um, so they look at his shop and basically see if there's any scrolls or magical items that they could gather. I want to say I can't remember if it was here or if that was back at the Smith, but I thought Rowan at some point got a few special arrows, like mainly arrows of biting, which does I want to say poison damage. I'm just going off the top of my head, but yeah. So and I want to say Deviant also purchased some scrolls of cure wounds here at the time. I could be wrong, but regardless. So after looking around, they, thank the wizard, who they actually come to find out his name is Thalantir, and he's been here forever, essentially. So they head out. They go back to Veragos, kind of plan their next move, and at this point they were kind of debating. Okay, we could go after the boots. We could go after the half ogres down to the southwest. We still haven't found Purdue's loot with the gnolls. So, or we could go to where Bjornen had mentioned a cave off to the east called Dark Hollow Cave, or at least that's the name the town was giving it. So they thought, yeah, let's just swing by there, and then we could go. Then swing back down to Ulcaster, and then kind of go from there. So they head off east, and they don't actually encounter anything. Once again, they got lucky on their rolls, but they make it to Dark Hollow Cave, and as they enter Dark Hollow Cave, obviously it's dark, hence the name. But on the sides of the walls, on a lot of the sides of the walls, is some different colored crystals, some orange, some green, some purple, just kind of line the walls that kind of give a little bit of lighting, not much, but just a little bit. And as they're walking in, they notice, they kind of surmise, going off of some of the tables in there, the structure of this essentially dungeon now, that this used to be a elven slash kind of dwarven kind of community, essentially. And as they're kind of looking through, pretty quickly off to the right, they notice imagine just kind of like an obelisk, kind of makes a point at the end with a green crystal in the center, and on each side, on all four sides, it kind of makes a circle around the crystal. And it looks like there's a platform on each side, or it's sort of raised up. And the party, they, want to check this thing out, so they start kind of looking at it. Devia does, I think it was Devia. It could, forgive me. It's been, like I said, it's been several months since I've actually ran this session, but. Regardless, I think it was Devia that did an Arcana check at this point, could tell that this thing was just oozing out magic like crazy. So Devia decides to, you know what, let me just walk up. I'm just going to touch this thing. But as Devia put her hand on the crystal, she just vanished like that. And at this point, Taviri and Rowan look at each other, just going like, is Devia dead? And the play is great because the player that plays Devia just kind of, I could just kind of feel it. He was just kind of sitting there in silence, and on Discord I had to message him really fast saying like, don't worry, you're not dead. But as it happens, Taveri and Rowan, they had no clue what happened to Devia. So Rowan kind of quickly tells I think it was Rowan that tells Taveri that, well, we gotta see if we can follow Devia, see if if she's still alive to see where this put her. So they both quickly put their hands on the crystal as well. And once again, it powers up and they're gone. And on the other side, forgive me as I'm pulling up this map for a description. As they get to the other side, they already see Devia kind of away from where this kind of raised up other platform is. It looks like they're still in sort of like a similar complex in a way. So, and of course behind them is another green crystal with an obelisk. And so they walk out. This ruin that they're now in looks a lot more, instead of dwarven slash elvish, this actually looks like more of like specifically an elven ruin. And so they're looking around. They look at a couple of rooms. They come to this one lock with it's a lock on a container, and there's 4 crystals kind of behind it. And essentially, I want to say it was Taveri that pretty much arranged the crystals to where their weights basically evened out. And as she did this, then the lock actually gave way. And inside, I don't think to this day they've used this, come to think about it, but inside they find a short sword +1, and it's called Ibratha. I think that's what I called it. But essentially, when you use it, it's only a once per day charge, but when you use it, you can actually cast Mirror Image on yourself. So Rowan is actually the one that decides to hold on to that. And they keep going in this ruin, and they actually come out to this large circular room. And imagine in the center, there's a drop-off on that goes down as far as you can see. And imagine the center, there's about like 8 chains kind of coming down all symmetrically from pillars. And in the center, it's just kind of like this floating kind of island, you could say, that actually has a statue of a man and a woman kind of holding up this jar. And they could tell something was actually glowing inside that jar. So, still at this point, Taveri can doesn't have her wings fully healed. So one of them decides to take their rope, throw it, and catch one of the sides of the statue, kind of swing over. I think it was actually Taveri and Devia. No, sorry. Taveri swung over, and then Devia decided to go along the chains and hop over there as well. Rowan actually decided to hang back on this one. So as Devia and Taveri get to where the statue is, I want to say Devia actually helped Taveri up towards the top of the statue, and then afterwards, Devia headed back over the chains. Successfully, of course. And as Taveri got to the top, she at first was starting to put her hand in where the jar is located, towards that glowing object. Because she's closer now, she realizes that the object is actually a necklace with round beads. About, I want to say it was 7 of them. But that's inside the jar. So she starts to put her hand in the jar, and pretty quickly, all of a sudden, lightning starts coming out of the jar, or just kind of like all in the jar. So she quickly takes her hand out of there without getting any damage, or if she did, it was very minor, just maybe a scratch. So she decides she really wants that necklace. She really wants to see what it's about. So she decides to take her quarterstaff and quickly slam it down into the jar and kind of do an upward motion to try to get this necklace out of there. And she is quick enough before the trap goes off. I think she actually rolled a nat 20 or something really high to do this. But so it goes off, or the necklace came out just as the trap's going off. So she is able to grab the necklace. And as she climbs back down and then goes across, getting the rope and going back across, she shows it. They all 3 of them then tried to identify this item, and come to find out that the item is actually a necklace that's beads of fireball. So every time you take off one of the beads and throw it, it would cast fireball, and you can cast multiple. And as you do, it would increase the level of that spell by 1 level. So Taviri was really happy she got this. So she was hanging on to this one. And as they continued through the ruins, they start noticing as towards the southeast part of the ruins that they start to hear a banging, what sounded like a banging. And so they go to investigate, and they decide to all sneak. And Devi at first was the first to look kind of like around this corner to see who it is. And who they see is actually a pretty well dressed elven looking woman. And she is kind of basically, imagine kind of like a room lit up, kind of like with an orange light that's coming. The orange light is actually coming from a forge that's right behind her, some kind of forge, and it looks pretty elven in material wise. And so she's just there hammering away on what looks like some armor. So Devia actually breaks stealth, goes out to greet her, and Taviri and Rowan follow up suit. And she's kind of surprised to see anybody else here. So she kind of stops what she's doing. She's greets them back, is pretty civil about it, and she introduces herself as Jaheira. And the party kind of asks, like, what's up? What are you doing here? And she explains that this is where she's been living for the past, about a year or so. And she's just been kind of working on this special armor. And, I don't think the players ever figured out what armor she was working on. From what they could tell, it was some kind of half plate. At least for right now, that's all I'm going to give away, just in case they see this. But so she was working on that. But one little tidbit they also found out was, I forgot to mention this in the last video, but the birthday present that they delivered to Tarim from Thomas was a pair of blacksmithing tools, and they were engraved what looks like had some elven runes and engravings into them. And come to find out, they learned from Jaheira, after talking to her a bit, that she had actually lost some blacksmithing tools just like that. Now, I don't think at the time that the party, they didn't reveal any of this to her. I think at the time they just said that they thought they came across some, or thought they saw some, and they were going to go back and check it for her. I think that's how it went down. So she was really looking to get those back. So the party just kind of, to the three of themselves, kind of just say that, well, maybe we should, before going back to the blacksmith in Baragost, we should actually go and speak to Thomas at some point and find out where did he get those blacksmithing tools. So after a few more moments of talking to her, they decide, or first, I'm sorry, they actually had previously, as they got to this ruin, I think it was Devia that said that she already had tried to go back through the crystal, and nothing was happening. So they kind of explained this to Jaheira, and she says that you actually need this special item that she has, this kind of rod that you kind of insert into the crystal. And she only had one more left at the time. So she actually allows the party to, get it back, and they gracefully thank her for it. And so they're going to go on their way. They look around in the ruins just a little bit more. One of the things they actually also find is a room filled with, I didn't go into too much detail about this, but they found a room filled with what looks like kind of specialized iron ore, kind of magical property in nature. And the party kind of thought to themselves after finding this that this is probably the ore that obviously Jaheira was using, so she was making some type of fancy magical armor with it. So they continue. They actually leave the ruins and go up to the surface just to kind of look around, see where they're at. And after a few rolls of looking around on the surface, they actually figure out, as they come out, it's all snow everywhere. They're on, in this mountain range, and after looking around for a bit and seeing kind of off in the distance, uh, they realize they're in the Clouds Peak Mountains, which is way south of Baragos, just to the south. There's another town south of Baragos called Nashkel, and it's just below that. Um, in my intro to these videos, it's the mountain range just that's pretty much cut off at the bottom of the start of those videos. That's where they're at currently. So they went a long way all of a sudden. So they immediately come back inside. They go back to the green crystal and use insert the rod, and then all three of them quickly stand in kind of like a triangle formation and are teleported back to Dark Hollow Cave. And hang on one second. Let me grab that other map just as reference as I'm explaining all this. Okay, so alright, so they continue on through Dark Hollow Cave, and as they continue on, they see more evidence of what looks like what used to be Elven and Dwarven, kind of like a residence here, you could say. And so they continue on, and after a few looking around some, they actually start hearing a couple of voices in the halls, and they get closer and closer to what kind of looks like kind of has a blue hue to it, but it's essentially a throne room with 7 chairs around it, with kind of like a triangle sort of symbol well, I mean, it's like 3 circles essentially that kind of make a triangle that's in the center of the room. So yeah, the 7 chairs are around it, and as they get to that chamber, the voices just stop. And the party's not really sure what to make of it. They're kind of freaked out about it, but they're not sure what to make of it. In the next room past that, though, is what are 5 switches, and in the center, what looks encased is some type of ring. So the party really wants that ring. They really want to see what that is about. So they, after so many minutes, they basically solve this puzzle to get to the ring after pressing so many switches in a certain order, essentially. And so the case opens up, and they grab the ring inside, and I want to say, for simplicity's sake, they didn't get this unidentified just yet, but later on down the line they did. But essentially what they found was a ring of protection. So as they get that ring, they decide, okay, we've pretty much explored all in this cave. So they start to, march on out of the cave. And as they do, it was really funny GMing this, because as they start to leave, they kind of start doubting, like, wait, isn't this the way we came in? Because all of a sudden, it's completely blocked off where they came in. And so they kind of start doubting, like, wait, isn't this? And so they kind of go around to the side passage that should connect to where, again, that entrance is. And once again, it is completely sealed off. So they're at this point freaking out. They're not really sure how they're going to get out of here, besides, going back through that crystal. But that would take them so far south. They really didn't want to do that just yet. So they actually go back into the throne room. And after investigating a little bit, it was actually Taveri that figured this one out, that she sat on one of the chairs that was pretty much aligned with one of those circles on the ground that made that triangle shape. So she actually directed Deviant Rowan to sit on the opposite, kind of making kind of like this angle from her, that would form a triangle, so the other 2 do. And as they do that, they hear an audible click, or kind of like, it was like audible click and then the sound of a moving wall. So they surmise that, all right, this is our chance. Let's get out of here. So they run back, and lo and behold, the entrance is back open. So they run out of Dark Hollow Cave as fast as they can. So at this point, they start to head back. It's starting to get more in the evening. And as they start to get back, they come across actually some bandits, some more bandits. All three of them notice they had the same similar medallions to them. And so it's about, I want to say 4 or 5 bandits. And so the 3 of them, they decide, okay, let's get the jump on them. So Rowan and Devia shoot off their arrows as Taveri once again charges in and starts beating them up. And the party just once again kind of mops the floor with them. Taveri gets a little bit injured, but not too severely. So they mop up the floor with them. Devia grabs more of those medallions to turn in to Jessie back at Beregost. So she holds on to those, and as the party's kind of looking through their belongings, Rowan actually looks inside. There's a couple of carts that the bandits were kind of going through, and Rowan finds some iron ore. Well, some of it's iron and some of it's iron ore. And Rowan actually takes part of I think it was one of those iron bars, and she actually decides to, I want to say, lick it at the time just to see, and nothing really happens. I just told her at the time that it just tasted terrible, awful, and it had just like this distinct nasty smell to it. And if I do a lot more of these videos, that will become a running trend later on. So she kind of just tosses it aside. And at this point, Prism actually, the elf from before that they escorted from the Friendly Arm Inn, he comes in. And he is just carrying his longsword. He just has some basic leather armor on him. And he tells the party that he's out trying to adventure, kind of like them, make his name. And the party essentially tells him that you're suicidal trying to do this on your own. We need to get you back to Beregost. So after some convincing, they convince Prism that he can't do this on his own, that he needs to go back. So they escort him back to Beregost. And as they do, they go back to the Feldpost Inn at Beregost. They once again, Perdue is there, and also Bjornen is there. So they go up to Bjornen and they ask him if he could actually take Prism under his wing and train him. And he actually doesn't really take much convincing at all. He thinks this is a wonderful idea. He can finally like mentor somebody, even though kind of in his ways, I guess. And so he's all for it. So he agrees to mentor Prism. And at this point, Prism, he was actually going to go off to the smith, and his longsword that he has, he's kind of gotten pretty, you could say he pretty much likes Rowan out of the group the most, you could say. So, or kind of, well, maybe not likes the most, but just has like a fondness for it, you could say. And so Rowan, of course, has red hair, being halfling, and he was actually going to engrave on his longsword the name Carrot Top. And honestly, that, in his mind, that would signify basically Rowan. That's kind of, just kind of like a nice touch he was going to do. So he kind of goes off to do that, and the party, they are kind of wiped out. Maybe not wiped out, but just, kind of exhausted from going through those dungeons. One thing they did kind of find strange going through Dark Hollow Cave is that they didn't encounter anything, and not really in the other dungeon as well, besides Jaheira. Just something to think about. And so they get some food and drink for the night. They talk to Bjornen some. Perdue is still asking about his loot, like, have you come across it? And the party says, no, we haven't, Perdue. We're trying to look for it, but we haven't. So they turn in for the night. And before I end this before the session ends. They all three, as they turn in, actually have a shared dream, and the dream went like this: they all dream that they're in this uh, kind of forested area, and as they go along, all of a sudden they encounter a hooded figure, a hooded man, looks like a hooded human man, talking to them. And he says, "Life is strength. You live, you affect your world. But what is it you want?" As he's pointing to the party. "You are different." And at this moment in the dream, the party sees Prism. And as they see Prism, the hooded man continues. He gestures towards Prism. "This man lives and has strength of a sort. He lost his parents to plague, his sister to war, but he persevered. His skills flourished, his name respected, and his future children are fed and safe. He lived as he thought he should, and now he is dead." And at this moment, the party, all of a sudden, Prism just collapses. He immediately dies. And the hooded man continues. "His land will be divided, his children will move on, and he will be forgotten. He lived a good life, but he had no power. He was slave to death. I wonder if you are destined to be forgotten. Will your life fade in the shadow of greater beings?"